QSO Today, Episode 409, Frank Roman, KC8VKA. My thanks to ICOM America for sponsoring the QSO Today podcast. A few reminders before we get started. The QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo will return on the weekend of September 17th and 18th, 2022. I have an open call for speakers and presentations pending until August 1st. Please apply if you have a technology, project, expertise, or history that you want to share with our Expo audience. In addition, our ability to continue to make these interviews and the Expo is from your support of our efforts. The sponsors menu item on the top of the QSO Today homepage opens up a page of sponsors and companies that will share a spiff with us if you buy their products, including QRP Labs, Gold Medal Ideas for shirts and hats, and Amazon. If you use the affiliate links on the sponsors page before you make your purchase, that will help keep us going, and we appreciate your using them. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth, amateur call sign 4Z1UG, where I demonstrate the diversity and relevance of the amateur radio hobby and its impact on society by interviewing amateur radio operators, many of whom played vital roles in shaping our technology through the amateur radio hobby. And while many people might say, ham radio, do people still do that? This podcast demonstrates through in-depth interviews just how amazing, diverse, and dynamic the amateur radio hobby continues to be. Frank Roman, KC8VKA, was born in Puerto Rico, grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, enlisted in the Navy, and served in Vietnam. Frank is a successful business entrepreneur, now retired, who has continued to leverage his education and experience both professionally and in his pursuit of amateur radio. KC8VKA enjoys mentoring hams in Cleveland, Puerto Rico, and in Panama City, Florida, in conjunction with the Panama City Amateur Radio Club. Frank is my QSO Today. KC8VKA, this is Eric, 4Z1UG. Are you there, Frank?
Yes, Eric. This is KC8VKA here, Frank.
Frank, thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
Well, my dad was in the U.S. Army, and he was in Panama Canal Zone. He was 6 years there. I was born, and he didn't see me till I was 2 years old. When he came back, he had gotten involved in some very interesting hobbies. We lived in Puerto Rico. We had a nice home on the outskirts of town, and we didn't have electricity. And so my dad had to use a battery-operated radio, and that was kind of expensive. So I'm 6 years old, and he used to take me around everywhere he went. And when he did things around the house, he'd have me watch and be involved with him. So I was always curious and interested in making things happen with my hands and just learning everything that he did.
I had the same experience with my father, that I was always holding the light in the right position so he could see what he was doing.
Oh, yes, that's true, too. Now that you mentioned that, I was holding a light for him when we were like working underneath the house. Back to the radio, he decided to make a crystal radio that he could use without having to buy batteries. So he got me involved in that. We wound the coil, and I remember it was about maybe like 100 turns. I got a spool of pipe or something. I think it might have like a spool of some sort. He had gotten a capacitor, and we built all that, and we put it on a piece of wood. And then for diode, he actually used a little crystal. He had the stone, and we had it like melted into a piece of lead with a little wire. We'd move it around, and then he had some real sensitive earphones, I believe. They had to be like a 50,000 ohm. So we got the phones, and we turned it on, and we wiggled that little wire around. And when I started hearing music and everything, I just couldn't believe it. I was jumping up and down. From that point on, that just started me into the curiosity and everything I could pick up and figure out how it worked and everything. I would do that. My mother was a seamstress, and she had a shop in part of the house, and she would make clothes for people, and she would even make them men's suits. And she was always messing around with sewing machines. And I would take the sewing machines, and sometimes I would take them apart, and then I'd have a hard time putting them back together, but I'd figure out how to put them back together. So that was always tinkering with things. if I got a hold of a watch or something, I would take it apart. I wouldn't be able to put it back together, but at least I figured out what was in there. So I was always curious with everything that I got in front of me. That's how I got started.
Frank, were you in the public school in Puerto Rico?
Yes, we lived outside of town, and there was a bus that would pick us up. I'd have to wait at the side of the road with a little. I had to wear a brown, like khaki pants and a brown shirt, and I'd carry a book bag with a strap that went over my shoulder, and I would stand there at the road, and the big yellow bus would come by, and the bus driver kind of knew the family and everything. I'd get on, and I'd go to. It was maybe 5 minutes down the road, in the town of San Lorenzo, Puerto Rico.
Was your interest in technology satisfied by the public school or the school library in San Lorenzo? Where did you go for knowledge other than helping your dad?
I was only in school in Puerto Rico till I was just going into the second grade, because at that point, my dad decided that he wanted to move back to the United States. So I remember wrapping up. I believe I finished up in second or first grade. During that time, we basically weren't covering anything technical, but I remember in Puerto Rico, my math books were in English, and I had to learn how to read English to figure out my math problems. And it was like, Johnny had 1 apple and Jane had 2 apples. How many did they have? But it was all in English. We spoke Spanish. We had to learn how to read that in the first grade. In 1950, my dad, he had made friends in the military, and they invited him to come up to Cleveland, Ohio. So he came up a year prior to us coming, and by that time he already had a house that he got all secured and everything. And then my mother, myself, and my little brother and my sister, we all flew here in 1951. It must have been like in February, something like that, because I remember we flew in the Ford propeller airplane, American Airline, and we sat in a little room. We had like a family thing where we sat in, all 4 of us, and we look out the window and we see these propellers and this humming, and it took it's not like today. I think it used to take. Now you can make it here in I don't know, maybe 4 hours. Back then I think it took almost 12 hours, and those engines were not turbines. They were the piston kind. You could hear the whole plane vibrating all the time. You could hear the humming and all that. And then when we landed here at the Hopkins Airport, it was cold, and I was probably 7 years old or 8, and my sister was a year younger, and my brother was a year and a half younger than my sister. We were freezing because we're not used to that, and my dad was waiting there with jackets to give us.
So that was your introduction to Cleveland.
Right, yeah. Well, we got in his car and we went, and he showed us the house, and we went in. My mother was all excited and everything else, and that's how we got here.
So your current QTH is Cleveland?
Yes.
And you've been there since 1950?
Yeah, 51.
So you're a native now of Cleveland?
Yeah, I've been here. I'm 78 now, so I've been here like 61 years.
What happened after that? Did you go into private school or did you go back to public school?
Well, that's an interesting story there, too. And I don't want to sound, how should I say, knocking any kind of type of school or anything, but I had a horrible introduction. My father enlisted us into the nearby Catholic school. I didn't know English that well, and for some reason or other, the teachers that I had didn't understand that if you don't know English, you can't read an English book. They would actually hit me in the knuckle to get me to read that book, and I just didn't know how to read it. I was telling my dad that, and he took me out and put me in public school. Everything changed a bit because they seemed to have better facilities and better understanding, of people like myself coming in trying to learn a new language.
Did you find that as a boy? Did you get to fluency relatively quickly?
Yeah, that actually, I found that to be a lot of fun because the neighborhood that I grew up in had Appalachians, and we called them hillbillies, and they were fine with that. And then there was the Europeans, and the ones that were around us, like kids, that they were Polish, so we call them Polacks. I think they call us Ricans or something like that. And but it was all good. At first, we had a hard time trying to get along because, we're all just come from different areas. And at first we had a little bit of scuffles in here and there, but I mean, we're little kids. And then after a while, we started kind of being more curious about each other. And before you know it, my mother was over there showing that our neighbors how to cook Puerto Rican food. And my neighbor was over teaching my mother how to can stuff, how to do preserves and stuff. So after a while, we were all just sort of exchanging our different knowledge of the different types of lives there.
So you actually fell into the melting pot.
Right. I grew up within, I'd say, a mile and a half where they made that film, the Christmas Story. My life is almost identical to that story. We had the house that looks almost the same. We had an alley that we used to have to go through, and then I had a little brother. And my dad, he was always down the basement trying to get the furnace to work. And it was, when I saw that movie, I had to laugh. I said, that could have been us, And then also my little brother had that same thing where my mother would put a lot of stuff on us in the winter. And my little brother had an outfit where it's like a whole piece. And if he fell down, he had a hard time getting back up, just like the Christmas Story.
How did your education proceed through high school?
My parents taught me that, to be, friendly and try to help everybody. So at the school that I went to, I believe I don't remember exactly what grade, third grade. Somebody donated like 7 tickets to the YMCA. The teacher wanted the class to vote who they thought should have it. I was one of them. So they gave me a 1-year free membership to the local YMCA. And there I just kept going all the time. And I liked the swimming, I liked weightlifting, and I liked wrestling and stuff like that. For a while there, that's what I did a lot of. At the same time, I was always tinkering. I remember the house that we bought, it had an old water heater, real old. It was just a big tank, and it was put together with rivets. And it had what they call a side arm heater. It was just like a copper coils and a burner. And that thing didn't have any safety features or nothing. I mean, you can blow your house up if you don't do the thing right. It was really old. That went bad. It started leaking. So we had to replace it. And we replaced it with a modern style water heater. So he did that. And I kind of was there holding a flashlight for him, like you said. Also, the house was wired. It had an old fuse panel. It wasn't even fuses. It was like a block, and it had like just lead. It looked like pieces of solder, but it had the terminals on the end. And that was really old. And we tried to plug things in, and those little things would burn out. So my dad decided that he's going to change that and put a regular fuse panel in there. And we did that, and I watched him do that. I was absorbing all of that as we went along. As time went on, and I went on into high school, by that time, I kept up with electronics. I took, I believe I was 15. I wanted to just learn more and more electronics, and the schools wouldn't provide that. So I took a course at night called Basic Electronics. And that was very interesting. I learned the Ohm's law and how electricity is generated.
And you learned that where?
I went to night school. I was 15, and I was still in a junior high school, I believe. So I just couldn't get the knowledge I wanted was not given to me at the school. They were more into things less complicated. But I wanted to learn electronics, so I took a course at night, and I'd go home. I had to go like 3 times a week or something like that. So there I learned the basic electronics, and also like tubes and triodes and anodes and rectifier tubes and all that. I learned all that stuff and biasing, and how to design, like an amplifier and how to put the proper bias and all that stuff.
Were you collecting parts and things like that in parallel with this course so that you'd actually have some projects at home?
Yeah. I had a red wagon, and during garbage day, I'd go down through the neighborhood, and the TVs and all that stuff people would throw it away. I'd bring them home, and I'd have a big room in the back of my house, and I'd pile it all up in there, and I would take it all apart, and I would separate all those things. And sometimes I'd find 2-3 TVs that were no good. I'd find parts. I'd take parts out of one and fix the other one. Then I learned that I could start selling the stuff. And then I learned that I could make money doing that. So I started fixing TVs and fixing record players. And I even repaired toasters that people would bring, ask, can you fix this? And I'd end up fixing toasters and record players and the old disc record players. My dad, he would go like to the pawn shop. He liked going to a pawn shop where they had all this stuff that was for sale because people didn't come to get them. And he brought me home, I think it was like an amateur radio handbook that I just kept looking into all the time. Then he brought me a soldering iron, a soldering gun that he saw. And then one time he brought home this multimeter. It was a Simpson multimeter. And I didn't even know exactly how to use it or how it worked. But then I read the book and I read up on it. My book was the Radio Amateur Handbook. And I just kept reading all that. And I figured out how that multimeter worked. And I found out that that one part of it, that's the scale, the low ohmic scale, wasn't working because they have several different scales for measuring different values, and the lowest ohm scale was not working correctly. So I was just determined to figure out why and how to fix it. And I found out that they had some burnt resistors, and I figured out what the right resistors was to get it to work. I couldn't find one resistor that would give the correct value. So then I figured out how to put a bunch of resistors parallel and everything to get the ohmics that I wanted. And I ended up fixing that meter. And I had it for many, many years afterwards. But anyway, I got into all this electronics. So I wanted to learn more. So I took another course called Industrial Electronics. And I believe I was at 6. And there I learned how they apply electronics into industry with all kinds like photoelectric cells to count merchandise. Back then, I think they had the magnetic clutches to start and stop stuff, and how they controlled all that. And it was all tubes back then. And learn more about rectifiers and electricity. So I was learning all that stuff pretty much on my own. And then my dad, being a veteran, he was eligible for advanced education and stuff for free. So he took a course.
That was under the GI Bill?
Yeah, right. So he took a course. I think it was called National Radio and Television. And it was a correspondence course, and it was out of California. And they would send him 2 booklets that he had to read and some projects that he had to build. Then he had to fill out the test in the back and turn them in. Well, he worked the night shift, so he would leave the work at 3 and come home at 2 in the morning or something like that. And during the day he was busy, so he would pick away at this. And after a while, he just was too busy to fill these things out. So they were all laying around. So I started messing with them, and I started filling them out for him. And it was about a year course. And then after a year, they sent him the diploma, and I was the one that filled them out for him.
That seems like that's a great way to begin your tour as an Elmer. Did this interest in electronics and technology help you decide how you were going to proceed to education after high school?
Well, my ambition was to go further in electronics, and I was a young kid fixing TVs, and everybody said, "Oh, he's going to be an engineer. He's going to be an engineer." So that was in my mind. And so when I got into high school, junior high school, and then into high school, you have to start taking courses, either trade courses or courses that will lead you to college. But I wasn't sure which way, so I took both. I took and I had to take extra classes. I took machine shop, and there I had to learn shop math and how to work with micrometers and stuff. And then I also took other other classes that were required for you to go to college, because I wanted to be eventually an electrical engineer. I think after my parents being here for 10 or 11 years, my dad did well because he bought homes and fixed them and made some money and all that. And he decided that he's just going to go back to Puerto Rico. By that time, I was 17 or 17 or 18. And I did like the idea of going back to Puerto Rico. I mean, I was all on the go over here. One summer, I went and stayed with my aunt in Puerto Rico. She worked at the University of Mayagüez, and they wanted me to go there. My uncle, he was in charge of power distribution throughout the island. He was going to pay me to go to college in Puerto Rico, and then I would work for him for some years to pay back in the electric. But I went down there, and I stayed a month with them, and I just didn't like it. And I didn't like here when I was going to school studying. you would read things and you can get to do them over there. You could just read them and read about it. And so we were learning a lot more faster here than I would have learned there. So I decided I'm not going to Puerto Rico. So when my parents were ready to go, I said, I'm not going. And they said, what do you mean you're not going? No, I'm not going. So I, I had to figure out how to survive. So I had about a year to get myself ready before they left. And during that time, I decided that I'm not going to make a living in electronics because I don't have enough education for that to get a good job. So I decided that I'm going to go all four specialized in machine shop because that would get me a job, hit right off the bat. So I studied machine shop for 2 years in high school, and I got really good at it. And then my machine shop teacher, he taught classes at night, and I was in the 12th grade. He said, "Can you help me teach at night?" And I said, "What?" And I said, "Yeah, I need help. My class is too big." So he got the Board of Education to hire me as a student teacher, and I was helping my teacher teach how to run a machine shop, like how to run lathes, how to grind tool bits, and how to run a milling machines and all that. And I hadn't even graduated from high school, and that's where I started kind of like learning how to teach other people stuff, and I liked it because I helped people, and once they learned something, they were really grateful that I helped them, understand what to do and how to do it. So that the feeling that I got after I helped somebody, and they were grateful that I was able to help them. That was a good feeling, and I liked that.
And now this message from ICOM America. Heard it, worked it, logged it. This summer, keep your competitive contesting edge with ICOM. Our high-powered base stations cut through pile-ups, letting you work the bands and log those contacts. Contest from the comfort of your home or remotely with the RSBA1 app. The ICOM IC7851 gives you a new window into the RF world, and its on-air excellence is unparalleled. With faster processors, high input gain, high display resolution, and a cleaner signal, it's truly the pinnacle of HF perfection. Features include dual receivers, digital IF filters, memory keyer, digital voice recorder, high-resolution Spectrum waterfall display, enhanced PC connectivity, and an SD memory card slot. The ICOM IC7610 is the SDR every ham wants. This high-performance SDR can pick out faint signals in the presence of stronger adjacent signals. The ICOM IC7610 is a direct sampling software-defined radio that has changed the world's definition of an SDR transceiver. Its features include RF direct sampling system, 110 dB RMDR, independent dual receiver, and dual digicell. Create your own band openings with the ICOM IC9700. This transceiver brings direct sampling to the UHF-VHF weak signal world. This all-mode transceiver is loaded with innovative features that are sure to keep you busy that include faster processors, higher input gain, higher display resolution, and a cleaner signal. This has become the new de facto standard as a baseband rig for microwave operation as well. Features include 4.3-inch touchscreen color TFT LCD, real-time high-speed spectrum scope and waterfall display, smooth satellite operation with 99 satellite channels, dual watch operation, and full duplex operation in satellite mode. The ICOM IC7300 is a high-performance innovative HF transceiver with a compact design that will far exceed expectations. This innovative HF transceiver digitizes RF before various receiver stages, reducing inherent noise in different IF stages. The IC7300 changed the way entry-level HF is designed. It is the go-to rig in my station now, and I love it. Features include RF direct sampling, 15 discrete bandpass filters, large 4.3-inch color touchscreen, real-time spectrum scope, and an SD memory card slot. Just know that you'll be very pleased with one of these fine rigs to enhance your contest, DX, and general ham radio operation in your station. Be sure to check out these ICOM rigs and their full line of base stations and portable radios at an amateur radio dealer near you. And when you make that purchase of a fine ICOM rig, be sure to tell your dealer that you heard about it here on the QSO Today podcast. And now back to our QSO Today. So what happened after that?
Well, My parents went to Puerto Rico from one day to the other, and then the next one day they were here. My mother was cooking for me. The next day they're gone, and I had to stay with my aunt. Right out of high school, I got a job. I got a job as a machine shop. I had a choice of three different jobs. I don't like being on a production line or being something repetitious because I got a creative mind. So I went to all these different places, and you were just a number. Your number this and your number that. There was this one company called Precision Industries, and I went, and it's a little tiny building, and there's only two guys in there. The owner, Elmer Heiser, a really nice Jewish engineer, really nice person. He says, Frank, you were highly recommended, and I think you're the guy I need. I have a patent on making high pressure springs out of nitrogen, and I need somebody to build them for me as I develop it. And wow, what an opportunity! And anyway, that's what we did. He would design something and draw it all up, and I'd go in the machine shop and make it, and then we'd put it on a press and we'd run it till it fell apart, and we try to make it better. And through the years, he got better, and we made better products. We started manufacturing them. Once we perfected one, I'd help him set up a line and make the tools and everything so that product could be made in mass production. And then he'd hire people that would just mass produce them. But I was always like the guy that was there, like doing the prototype of developing, right underneath the engineers. And I learned a whole lot from him. Him and his son, they were really great people. And he was always generous. He always gave me raises and stuff.
I'm interested in knowing, because you're wearing a Vietnam veteran hat. If I do the math in my head, you're about 18, 19 years old when your parents leave, right? 17 when they leave, but that makes it 1960, right?
That's about correct. Yeah, right.
So the war hadn't really started yet, which means that when the war was raging, you'd be in your early 20s. Were you draftable in your early 20s? And were you drafted?
Yeah, I was worried about getting drafted. At that point, I was working in the machine shop, and that this was probably, it was around the time Kennedy got killed.
63, the end of 63.
Yeah, well, by that time, I had been working for a few years at machine shop, and my buddies from the neighborhood I grew up in, they were getting shot. They were getting drafted in Vietnam and getting killed. I'm thinking, holy mackerel, it'd be a matter of time before I wind up over there. So one day I'm running the machine, I'm working, and the foreman comes out and he says, Frank, they just killed the president. Man, that was like, oh man, I didn't know what to cry. I didn't know what to do. Everybody was shocked. And then that made me think, man, I'm going to end up over there now that, everything's going wacko. So I said, I'll be pretty safe if I'm on a ship or something. Plus I want to pursue education. So I went I sat down and thought, which direction I want to go. And I like the most technical, the most equipped machinery bounds and technology. I considered it was the Navy. Also, I'd be able to travel, and I might be able to, even if I was on a ship, I might even wind up in Puerto Rico where I could visit my family. I went down to the recruiter, and I told him that I was a machinist and everything, that I would join the Navy, but I want them because I got something to offer, and I would join if they give me a guaranteed that I was going to get some kind of schools. My interest was always electronics, so I told them I want to be an electronics technician in nuclear submarines because I heard that if you go into the nuclear program, you get like a lot of education, and you get even like 2 extra years how nuclear reactors work and stuff. So I wanted to get all that, get as much as I could get. They said, good, they're fine. They gave me a contract that I would get that. So they set a date for me to, have to go to boot camp. And about a couple of weeks or a month or so after I did that, my mother calls me from Puerto Rico, and it's hard back then, but telephone calls were hard to make. And she was all worried that what did I do, because the FBI was down in Puerto Rico asking questions about me and stuff, and she thought I got in trouble and everything. And I said, no, I joined the Navy, and they're probably doing a background check because I'm going to go to a nuclear school, and you need some sort of a clearance for that. And she said, well, they're even asking the first grade teacher and all that about you. And I said, well, they're probably, but I'm not in trouble or nothing, So anyway, that was kind of funny. So I went to boot camp. I joined the Navy, went to boot camp, and I did good there because, my parents raised me and my brother and sister kind of with some discipline because my dad was military. So, I was always meticulous about my making my bed and all that. So in boot camp, I did good. In boot camp, you got to do all kinds of things. And in the Navy, it's psychological. They want you to they want to break you because they don't want you to break on board ship and go nuts on a ship. So it's like a whole lot of stuff, a whole lot of things you got to remember that you're bunking this and that, and wash your own clothes, and they only give you minutes, and they give you like 5 minutes to eat your dinner and run. And I was able to do all that without problems. So I did good. Of course, the Navy boot camp is, they teach you there how to survive at sea, how to fight fires, and the routine thing for boot camp. Then after boot camp, after you get that, then they send you, and then you start your regular education. So the next step was to go to electronics technician school, which is up there in Great Lakes, Illinois. So I was waiting for it to finish boot camp and get sent over there. The personnel there on the base, they called me and they had a meeting with me, and they said that I can't go in nuclear submarine. And I said, well, what do you mean I can't? I said, well, you got problems with colors, but it was kind of true, but I already passed the test. And I said, well, that ain't right, man, because I already passed the test, the color test. And I said, if I don't get what's on my papers, I can go home. And he goes, yeah, you can go home. If you don't get what's written down, you can go home. But as soon as you get on your porch, the Army's going to grab you. And I said, well, I don't want that. So what is it you want me to do? And he says, well, you're a machinist. We don't need electronic guys. We need machinists. And I'm wondering, oh, well, what is it to do? And he goes, well, we want you to be either a machinery repairman or a naval engineer. And I said, well, what's a machinery repair? Well, the guy runs a lathe and drill presses. I said, well, that's what I do already. Well, what's the other one? Oh, you learn how to run the power plant and how to run the turbines and how to make steam and lubrications and hydraulics. And I said, well, that's what I want, man. I want more education. So that's what so they cut 2 years off my hitch. I went in there for 6 years. They cut it back to 4 years, and then they sent me to what they call machinist mate school. And it sounds like a simple name, but it's a lot to learn. You end up, it's like learning how to run a power plant, where they generate electricity. You learn how to run the boilers and turbines, water distillation, how to generate electricity, a whole lot.
Now, Frank, is that because these boats have electric motors, so they would actually generate electricity to run these motors?
Well, there's various different types of vessels up there. On my ship, the propulsion system was steam turbines, and we had boilers, 4 boilers and 2 engine rooms, and the turbines worked on 600-pound steam, and each turbine can produce 65,000 horsepower. And then we generated our own electricity. It was three phase. I don't remember what the KW on that was, but we ran our own generators that worked on 600-pound steam, and we had to run that and keep that running. But there was two main generators, one forward, one aft, and then we also had 2 additional diesel backup generators. And on a military vessel, everything is redundant. Like if one blows up, you can transfer the power to the other and all that. My job was to, when we're in combat, my job was to maintain all that and operate it and teach other people how to operate it. But in combat, my battle station was damage control. So what that meant is, like if something blows up, I have to figure out how to bypass all the damage and keep everything working. So I have to know where all the valves are at. We also have to fight fires. We have to deal with the bodies, and we also have to deal with the ship not sinking. But my job, I was in charge of Repair Party 2, which dealt mostly with the center of the ship where all the mechanical systems are at, and that's what I was the leader of the Repair Party 2. For generating electricity, as a matter of practice, Guantanamo, they have an old fashioned submarine, and we would change crew. We would go in the submarine as an observer, and they would send people from the submarine on destroyer. And I was on a destroyer, the Allen M. Sumner, D692 was the name of the vessel. And if anybody's interested, we have a very interesting history on it. And we were in Vietnam. I wound up in Vietnam. It's called Operation Sea Dragon. You can look that up. It's really interesting reading what we did. But we did a lot of stuff, a lot of shooting, a lot of rescuing pilots, destroying supply lines, all kinds of stuff. But anyway, in the submarines, the old submarines, they work on batteries, and the motors, the propulsion system is electric motors, DC motors, and the way they charge is they have diesel generators, and they can charge the batteries when they're out of the water, or they can charge the batteries when they're snorkeling. And these diesel generators pull the air right out of the compartment, the same air that the crew breathes. So if you're under the water, they have a snorkel that goes up and it pulls air through that snorkel, and lets air get into the submarine. And then there we can breathe it ourselves, and the diesel generators can consume it. When I went down there, they call it a flapper valve at the top of the snorkel. And when a wave hits that flapper valve would go closed, so water wouldn't come in. And if we're running the diesels where we're underwater, the diesels will continue to suck air out of the compartment, and it would create a negative pressure, and your ears would feel like they're going to pop. But the batteries have to be charged, and they could only have, I don't know how much time, but they could only be under the water operating with batteries with a limited amount of time. I served the 4 years. I won tour.
So you were not career military like your father after your 4 years?
My father was not career. He was 6 years, but he was because of the war. He was 6 years because that's what at that time that's what they had to be because of the war. But when I signed up for 6 years because that was required because you go to nuclear reactor school, and that would take an additional time. I really never went in with the intent to be a career because I knew I just wanted more education, and I went in for the education plus somewhat avoid winding up in the jungle of Vietnam. But it turned out that we wound up over in Operation Sea Dragon in Vietnam, and that was just as bad. I mean, we weren't in the jungle, but our ship was old, and my job, the reason I wound up on that ship was because I could help repair it because I knew how to make parts. I wound up on the island of Sumner out of Jacksonville, Florida, and I went on there. When I went down there, it was all taken all apart, and it was an old ship built in 1942, and we had to recondition it because they were bringing back conventional vessels like that to utilize over in Vietnam. Because over in Vietnam, they didn't need guided missile or anything like that. It was just regular old cannons.
So you were part of the restoration of the ship to make it seaworthy for Vietnam.
Right. At that time, they didn't tell us it was Vietnam. They just tell us we have to restore it. All along, that's what they wanted me to do. So right from the beginning, from boot camp, that's why they wanted me not to go into electronics, but because they needed people like me to put on old ships to restore them.
How long did it take you to restore the USS Allen M. Sumner?
When I showed up on the ship at 8:00 at night, I got onto the deck, and the captain there, the officer of the deck, got my orders, and he looked them up, and he says, "You're the guy we've been waiting for." And I didn't know what all that meant. But anyway, the next morning, the chief took me to show me where my working station was, and he took me into the forward engine room. And then that's where I saw all these turbines and stuff, and it's all familiar to me because that's what we had at the schools. And then I was already, because of my work at civilian work, I already was familiar with centrifugal pumps, compressed air, and various different things, pressure regulators. That was part of the work I did as a machinist. Then they took me down all the way down to another level, way at the bottom level. That's where all the pumps are, the pumps that pump water, lubrication. And those things are all disassembled. They were opened up and parts hanging out and stuff. And he says, "Your job is to put all this thing back together and get it all working." And I looked around and said, "Holy mackerel!" But none of it was beyond, because it all looked familiar. It was all familiar things that it were. And so they said, "You're going to be here. This is your job. Nobody's going to mess with you. You come and you pick away at this and get everything fixed. And if you need anything, you come and you let me know what you need, and we'll get anything you want." And I think I worked on it for like 6 months, maybe 5-6 months. I got everything rebuilt and everything. And then after I was just in that area, but at the same time, there was being work done to the rest of the ship, other places. But by that time, the ship all got finished up, and we took it for sea trials, and everything worked good and everything. And then from there, and then after that, we took a cruise over to the Mediterranean for 6 months.
And that wasn't bad.
No, yeah, we went up in the Mediterranean. We sailed across. Took us 7 days to go across. We left Jacksonville, Florida, and when we hit Gibraltar, about 7 days, they deliberately put us in storms so we can get used to hitting rough seas and practice. So we followed the storm all the way across. I used to get seasick, so I'd be like barfing all the time. But then I'd end up eating crackers and stuff. Once we got into the Gibraltar, we saw, we went right by the Rock of Gibraltar and all that stuff. And we went to Palma de Mallorca, we went to Malta, we went to Beirut, we went to Greece, Italy. All those countries we stopped on, all those different places. I got to go to I got to go up and climb Mount Vesuvius. I got to see Pompeii. I went to the Acropolis, to the Parthenon. I went to all those places.
Let's go back to amateur radio. When did you get your first license?
When I was taking that industrial electronic course, it was probably around 60. That was the same time that my parents were moving to Puerto Rico, and I was on my own. And I got the license, but I never was able to really use it because I was always in apartments and going to school and working.
And what license was that? Did you get the novice or the technician? Do you recall?
I don't remember exactly. I think it might have been the beginning one, the first one, because I do remember I had to take a code. I think it was 13 words a minute. And even today, I don't know code that well. But back then, when you're young, you learn something real quick. But many, many years have gone by and I never practiced it or anything.
Do you remember your first call sign?
No, I don't. And I wish I did because I could have always reverted back to it. And I've had people try to find it, under my name and this and that. And I've never had no luck because what happened is after I got it, I think I've only was able to use it once or twice. Some equipment that I made, I had a helicopter receiver, and I made my own transmitter out of old car radio parts, and I believe it was down to 80 meters and stuff. I don't remember exactly, but I know I was able to at least have a build a transmitter and got it working, but I never had a place where I could have permanent antennas. So anything I did was sort of makeshift. So once I got once I had to survive on my own, I really didn't have time for that. It was always work, and study and work and study. Then I was in the Navy, and in the Navy, of course, you didn't have no problem, no. And for that, when I got out of the Navy, I started my own company, and that was like 40 years of running in front of a freight train.
What business did you start and run for 40 years?
In the Navy, they wanted me to stay. I made really high ranks. I made E5, which is sergeant, in less than 2 years. And then I qualified and I made E6, but you couldn't get that unless you re-enlist. So I never was, even though I made it and all that, I didn't get it until I signed the papers that I was going to stay in at least 6 years. But anyway, when I got out, I went back to my machine shop job. And they took me in and they gave me a party and everything else and gave me all my bonuses and everything like it. Mr. Heiser was a tremendous guy. But I worked back in that same shop for a little under 2 years. And by that time, I had got a taste of what it is to be free to travel all over the world. And I couldn't stand being in the factory the rest of my life. And that just kept bothering me. So what I did is I just ended up starting my own business. I did it by buying into a small business so I could learn how to run business. I knew the work and refrigeration. Well, another thing I missed out on was that the Navy also sent me naval heating and air conditioning school too. That was another thing they gave me, and they gave it to me so I would remain on that same ship without leaving. And they said, if you go to this school, we'll pay for it. You don't have to sign up for any more time as long as you come back to the ship. So they sent me to Norfolk, Virginia, and that's where I studied naval heating and air conditioning and stuff, big stuff for aircraft carriers and things like that. Out of the Navy, I was able to get what's considered 2 associate's degrees. One was in stationary engineering and HVAC. A lot of experience doing everything you could think of. Going back to the machine shop, that just kind of bored me. And so I bought into a guy was going to retire. He had a little company, and he wanted somebody that sort of like to buy in so he could sort of turn the company over to them. And I did that. I got my feet wet as far as how to get customers, where to buy the equipment, how to do the payroll, how to do the taxes, how to get incorporated. I learned all of that on the fly. Just by buying into the company, I learned how to do all of that. And I didn't take no courses or anything. I just got books and read them. I taught myself. From that little company, I joined another company. And anyway, it went on, and I worked for different companies, and I learned how different companies operate. And eventually, I wound up having my own company, mechanical contracting.
So mechanical contracting meant heating and air conditioning, but at the industrial level, you were like doing office buildings.
Yeah, when you get involved in mechanical contracting, heating, air conditioning, and all that is the predominant function, but it entails a lot of stuff. It entails like boilers. It entails like process refrigeration systems that they use in manufacturing. It entails boilers for, like, I did some work from boilers for a company that makes cardboard boxes, and they wanted me to design a system that would provide steam to the machines that make the cardboard. I also worked for a company called these are contracts that I got, or customers that came to me, and I would design stuff like I made an environmental room to test roofs, shingles. They would make like a small roof, and this is like a 10 by 10 room, and it would rain and it freeze, and then lights would come on, and what that would do is age the roof real fast to see how long they last. So that was like a special environmental room, computer rooms, chiller plants, chillers that would cool down acids for chrome plating. It branched off into all kinds of different industries.
I want to take a minute to tell you about my favorite podcast, the Ham Radio Workbench Podcast, with George, KJ6VU, and now joined by Rod, VA3ON, Mike, VA3MW, Mark, N6MTS, and Vince, VE6LK. Every 2 weeks, George and company offer up a status report on the many amateur radio projects on their workbenches and explore projects on their guests' workbenches. This group is project active and prolific, covering many technical areas of amateur radio. So the next time you want a deep dive into ham radio electronic project building, or to learn about technology, tools, test equipment, construction techniques, and the rest, listen to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast, available on every podcast player and channel. Use the link in this week's show notes page to get to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast directly. And now back to my QSO. When did you get back into amateur radio?
After I retired, my last big project, they hired me as an outside contractor to run the construction of Jacobs Field. That is the Cleveland Indian Stadium. It's a big jet project, and it was out of control. Nobody had all the different trades and they're working, and nobody coordinated anybody with each other. And somebody had to get a grip on it, and get everybody together and get everything as a one unit rather than a lot of different parts. The tinners, the pipe fitters, the electricians, control guys, they were all just doing their own thing, and nobody was bringing them together, and nobody knew how to do that. So they hired me to come in there and get a grip on that. And I ended up being there a year and a half, wrapping up the place. I was able to get everybody to work together and everything. We got it done time. And then when I got done with that, I started getting a problem with my heart. I felt real fatigued, real tired and all that. It ended up having to get surgery. I had to get bypasses. So after that, I decided, I'm just going to slack off. I had enough time. I ended up joining the Pipe Fitters Union, and I became a pipe fitter journeyman. Although I owned the company, I was still, they allowed me to be a union member. So by that time, I had put in 30 years, and I qualified for retirement at 30 years. So the Pipe Fitters Union, their retirement plan is good. Their medical plan is good. So when I was during the time that I was got into the union, I had my own business, but I was a consultant at that time to another company. They unionized that company, and I qualified. At that time, I was classified as an employee. So I was able, with my credentials from the Navy and all my education, I qualified the pipe fitters in order for them to take you in and not have to go to all the apprenticeships and stuff. You have to have background in piping and machining and welding and all that kind of stuff. And you have to come up with credentials. So I brought in all my naval credentials, and they said you have to have a minimum of 5 years. So with the Navy and all that, I brought in my credentials, and they gave me credit for 9 years. So they took me in as a pipe fitter journeyman, but I had to serve a 1-year apprenticeship, a 1-year temporary thing.
Okay.
So I became a certified pipe fitter journeyman. But then during that time, I went back to doing business, and I went back into being a bigger union mechanical contractor. And the union has this thing that you could have your business and be a union member, but you fall into a category what they call owner worker, and it's your owner and a worker. So I stayed with those benefits so I could have a good retirement to retire.
How did you get back into amateur radio?
Well, all along, even though I lost track of my license and I wasn't all along I was fixing radios for people all the time. They were sending them to me to fix. And I just did them when I got home from work, when I had a chance. But when I got home, I'd be looking at blueprints and putting estimates together and talking to people. I got involved with politics to get work from the government and all that. Never had. So whenever I wanted to just relax and not think about anything, I'd go and tinker with a radio. And people would ship me radios from all over to fix them. I specialize on the Yaesu FT101s. There were 2 radios, and people would like those, and they would ship them to me to fix them and ship them back, or they drive by and pick them up. And I just tinkered with them, troubleshot them, fixed them, recalibrated them. I didn't have a license to transmit, but I put them on my workbench and worked on them.
Did you have test equipment?
Oh, yes, I've always had test equipment.
Signal generator, frequency counter, things like that?
Yeah, signal generators, frequency counter scopes. I've always had that stuff. But one thing that I learned, because when I was a kid, I wanted to look impressive, and I had all this stuff, a big desk with scopes and test tubes and all that. After being in the Navy, you only carry on a ship, which is absolutely necessary. There's no room. So even in the Navy, I learned how to troubleshoot with minimal stuff. Even like when you go to troubleshoot a refrigeration system, you just go by feel. You grab a pipe and you feel the temperature, and you go here. You learn how to do all that with very minimal stuff. So when I got out of the Navy, I bought my first house. I got a 2-family. My dad taught me how to get ahead, financially, with doing things like instead of buying an expensive house, buy a fixer-upper 2-family and live in one half, fix the other half, and then then rent it. And then that apartment paid the mortgage. So I ended up doing that. And I was financially independent by the time I was 41 years old, because I just pursued the things that my dad told me to do. But one of the things that I did is that when I put up a workbench or something, I knew what I needed, what I didn't need. And a lot of people, they invite me over to the shop and they have all this stuff, and almost half of it is all just for show. It's just that it doesn't serve a purpose. So I streamlined all my tools, even when I had my own business, that I carried what I needed. I didn't carry nothing I didn't need. So whenever I had a shop, I had just what I needed. A multimeter, signal generator. I used an old radio as a signal tracer. I never bothered with a scope. The only time I bothered with a scope is when I want to check the modulation on a sideband radio or modulation on AM signal. If you have to break out a scope to troubleshoot something like a TV, you're kind of wasting your time, because that consumes so much time, and TVs are throw away. So if you have to spend more than 2-3 hours goofing with a TV, just tell the guy to buy another one.
So you're working on radios in the evening while you're running this business and consulting with another business. So how did you get back into amateur radio in terms of getting your license again?
When I finally decided to retire, I finished up the commitments I had. My partner, he bought me out. All of a sudden, I went from working, like running in front of a freight train, to being at home not doing anything. And that was hard to do that. It's hard to accept that. You get up in the morning and you think you got to run, and you have no place to run to, and you get anxiety and stuff. So I decided to start making plans to build a house in Puerto Rico. So I had some land I inherited down there, so I went down there and we started building a house down there. Before I got down there, I already had gotten back into radio. I had a lot of time, so I started going to ham fests. At different times, I went to different ham fests. Like I used to go down to Florida because my daughter's husband was a brigadier general of the Air Force down there, and I'd go visit them. I decided that I want to get my license, so I started reading the book and stuff, and one day I was out in the ham fest down there, and they asked me if I wanted to take the test, and I said, let's try it. I probably failed it, but let's see what it's like. And I passed my first one, tech, and then once I got that, I got rolling. The ball got rolling faster. Then about a year later, I was at another ham fest. I think it was in Dayton, and I took the test, and I don't remember where I got it, but anyway, I passed it, and I got the general. Now I've been around. I've been many years. I've been a ham, but since 2002, I believe. I've never bothered to get my advanced yet.
Well, I don't think you can. I don't think you can test for the advanced anymore.
Well, I mean it's the next one above it.
The extra.
Extra. Yeah, I've been tinkering around with it and stuff. Even though I'm retired, people are after me to fix air conditioners. I have a boat. I'm real active outside. One of my hobbies was to build motorhomes. I'd buy vans and make motorhomes out of them. And all that keep me so busy that I don't have time to bother with the books. I'm okay with just being a jet.
What's your favorite operating mode?
Sideband. I'm more of a really in-depth technical guy. And what I enjoy is just rat chewing with people that I can have intelligent conversations with. And I do a lot of talking on that night on 80 meters with my friends down in the Caribbean, Puerto Rico, and because I know a lot of hams from down there, because for 14 years, I would spend my winters down there. There again, everywhere I went, people do. I don't know if people find out about me knowing stuff, but I'd be talking to them on the radio, and the guy's trying to figure out how to build an antenna, and I'd get on there and say, "Well, try this and do that." And if you want to come by my house, and I'll show you how to make one. By doing that, before you know it, you got a whole bunch of people after, and that's fine. I like doing that. So very quickly in Puerto Rico, I was going around the island giving presentations about how to make antennas, how to make. One thing in Puerto Rico, things are, you can buy things online, but it gets costly to ship them there. And there's also a tariff or a customs that Puerto Rico's trying to pay off a debt that they have because the government went default, but now they have a 15% sales tax. So when anything arrives over there, they have to pay that too. So what they end up doing is just trying to build it themselves. One of the big things that they wanted me to do when I went to Puerto Rico was everybody's trying to build antennas out of whatever little materials they got. So I started showing them how to make antennas out of PVC and regular electrical wire. And I came up with different antennas that you can make. And the thing is that in Puerto Rico, there's a lot of hurricanes. And Puerto Rico, when a hurricane comes and tears everything up, people can't drive there from adjacent states to a ham. They have to get there on a ship. So people have to learn how to get by with what they have left after a hurricane.
Which hurricane was it that went through Puerto Rico a few years ago? Were you involved in the rescue efforts there?
I wasn't, because I only go down there for the winter. I spent 3 months. But I make portable go boxes, which is radios and waterproof boxes, self-contained with batteries and all that. And during that hurricane, a couple of guys had a couple of boxes that they used they bought off of me. I don't make them to sell. I just make them for myself. And when they see one, they buy them. I make myself another one. But there was a group down there that used 2 of my boxes to go from town to town and report back. So I wasn't involved, but some of the stuff I made was used during that hurricane.
We will return to our guests in just a moment. A new way to show your support of the QSO Today podcast is to buy me a coffee. I consume gallons of coffee to create this weekly podcast. Invite me for coffee by pushing the yellow button, Buy Me a Coffee, on the QSO Today show notes page. And now back to our QSO Today. Well, one of the reasons that we're speaking today, Frank, is that Greg Lane, N4KGL, sent me a message and said, you ought to interview Frank Roman, KC8VKA, because he's a big mentor, a big Elmer for the Panama City Amateur Radio Club. How did you find yourself in Panama City? Was that where your daughter was?
Yes. We had a routine that we would go after I retired, and I already had gotten my license, and I had gotten some equipment and stuff. We had a routine that we would go to Puerto Rico like around right after the holidays up here, and we spent 3 months down there during the winter. And then before we went down there, we would go visit my daughter like for Thanksgiving. Her husband was stationed at Tyndall. I always take me a walkie-talkie and equipment. It was kind of interesting how I got with ham radio, because when I first was going down to Panama City the first time, I didn't know what Panama City was or anything else. I just knew my daughter was there. By that time, I had a station set up here in Cleveland, And I was talking on my radio in the evening, and I heard this one guy. His name was I forget his name. I don't remember. He's a ham down there, a real nice guy. I heard him on the radio, and I heard him saying Panama City, Florida. And then I didn't even call it his call sign. I just said, "Hey, this is KC8VKA, Panama City. You got a copy?" And he said, "Yeah." And he gave me a sign and everything. And he's got a real Southern gentleman accent, and he's a slow talker. He says, "Yeah, I'm down here in Panama City, Florida. So you're coming down this way, huh?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, y'all looking me up, and I want to make a friend like y'all." It talks like that, and I said, "Good, man. When I get down there, first thing I'm gonna do is gonna look you up." So I got down there and I went over to his house, and he started telling me about the club, and that they meet on I think Thursday night. They meet at the local Waffle House right after the club. Go to the Waffle House and he'll introduce me off to all the guys. So I did, and I'm real quickly at the Waffle House. I got to meet a lot of the guys that were members of the Panama City Club. And then I started going, and then, little by little, I just got more involved with them.
What's the Beginners Academy, and what role have you played in the Beginners Academy there?
Well, Greg Lane puts a lot of effort into this club. He does a great job of keeping things stimulated, and he wanted he wanted to do something to entice more people to join, and so he started with a program on how we're going to get more people to become members and stuff. I came up with different things, and he decided to he puts out information that the club welcomes anybody without the license that wants to have license, and they can come and have a meeting and listen. And then there would be people that would volunteer to talk to them about it and answered all their questions, or there'd be some guys that volunteer there to just be ready to answer any questions anybody has. So I started doing that. It got to where I ended up helping a lot of people that have problems having antennas in apartments and stuff. And there's a lot of guys that ended up that didn't understand radio. So I would actually go to their houses and bring my portable equipment, because I have a lot of my stuff is stations that I can just carry around and portable antennas. And I would go to their houses and I would just set them up in their yard and real quick and everything, and give them a feel for what it is to have a radio. And I just enjoy that, because I'll be visiting people, and that stimulated a lot of people. People get all excited before you know it. They want to do what I'm doing, so they go back and study more and pass their tests. And then after they pass their test, the Greg has on Zoom or in person sometimes, where people are just beginners and they have problems or questions that they want someone to help them resolve. And so Greg put me on a list as one of the mentors to volunteer for that.
And when you're in Cleveland for half the year, are you also involved in mentoring hams in the Cleveland area?
Yeah, in Cleveland, I do a lot of that. In Puerto Rico, I did a lot.
What's the club there in Cleveland?
The club here is West Park Radio Ops. I've been a member of that. Lately, I haven't been too active with them, because I'm more of a on-the-go guy, and it's not through anybody's fault, but the club is, unfortunately, they're not bringing in new members. I mean, they can't entice new members. Most of the members are getting old, and they don't want to be active. They want to just do things like they don't like. There's a hard time for them to even do a field day. So there are a lot of people losing interest. But I mean, I still consider myself a member, and I'll still help them, and I still do whatever I can. But I do things like I'll call a bunch of guys. Let's meet behind the North Hempstead High School at the Pavilion. Bring all your portable stuff. I'm going to try to get you up to speed on what it is, what radar is, rapid amateur radio deployment. And what's that mean? Well, it means portable equipment, and what a portable equipment is, how you can, what you can create to be portable, and antennas. What kind of antennas? Well, antennas is you make your own antenna, and then you'll see how it compares to everybody else. And then you come to see what everybody else does, and then you get ideas. So I do a lot of that. And it turns out good, because guys will come out, and we'll be about 4 hours, and it's all a spur of the moment thing, rather than plan something for months down the road. I wait till maybe a week and I know whether the weather's going to be real good. And I say, this Sunday's going to be good. This Saturday's going to be good. Let's meet. And I'll call them up personally. I'll call them up one by one.
How many people do you get when you do that?
Oh, I've gotten up to 15 people, to 20 people. Sometimes I'll tell my club because they have a roster and they'll put the word out. And then there's other clubs that the word gets out. And sometimes a lot of people come and showing a lot of interest because besides portable equipment, now I've been dabbling with loop antennas, magnetic loops, and I build them. And a lot of people don't understand how they work and all that. And I make them. I do a lot of refrigeration work, air conditioning. I have a lot of copper tubing left over, so I make loops out of that with leftover copper.
Are you talking like half-inch copper or quarter-inch copper, or are you actually talking big copper, like 1 or 2 inches in diameter?
No, it'd be like a 3/4 inch outside diameter copper, 3/4 inch and a half inch, not the real big ones. The loops I make the biggest one I made was 5 foot diameter. It was too big. I made it out in my garage. I took it inside. I was going to take it inside in my basement to solder it. And I couldn't get it in the house, so I had to make it so I could I cut it so I could disassemble it. Then I started doing a lot of experimenting with what size loop I need and what size capacitors. And then most of the loop antennas they make them for low voltage for QRP because if you got to use a capacitor that's going to handle 100 watts, you need a very large capacitor.
Very expensive large capacitor.
Yeah, and then. So as I built different ones, I have some that the loop is made out of coax, portable ones that fold up. So I've made a whole bunch of different kinds. The latest one I made is where the capacitors, I operate it with a little motor, so I can leave it outside and control it from the inside with a remote control. And then I had to figure out the gear ratio, and I had to go online and find out what motors to get. That was part of my business anyhow, hospitals and places, with even sometimes NASA. Not too much NASA, just a couple of times over there. They'd ask me to come up with some kind of control device to do something, and I would design it for them. So these loop antennas, they work well. It comes in handy for people that want to operate out of their apartment. I've been asked a lot to go and explain to people how loop antennas work, what the capacitors, what they need, or even how to make them.
What do you think it takes now to make a successful amateur radio club? And what kind of commitment do you think that makes, that you have to have in order to be able to make that a success?
When I was working with Mr. Heiser, and I was young back then, he told me that in today's world, if you're going to succeed, you have to be diversified. And I didn't know quite what that meant. But he says, you got to be able to change directions on a dime. And if you're building bottle openers today, tomorrow you got to be able to build screwdrivers and without even giving it a thought. So you have to remain flexible and go in the direction that you need to go to stay in business. What's happening to some clubs is they're too complacent to what, and they stay the same way they've been the same for 20, 30 years. And they don't see that. That's a big turnoff. That's the major problem that I see. You have to stay up with things. Your leadership has to think modern, do things to entice younger people to get into it rather than try to do things the old way and stuff like that.
When you do something like spontaneously put together an afternoon event in the park, do you have people that come visit you or walk by or are in the park as well? Do they come up and ask you what you're doing, and are you prepared to deal with, say, the public's questions?
Yeah, in fact, I enjoy that as much as helping their hams, because I've developed a way, because I had employees, and during my growing up and stuff, my first job was in high school. I was teaching people machine shop. I found out that you need to explain things to people in a way that they can relate to it. A new guy wants to understand what an antenna does and all that. Well, I'll explain it to them in a way where they can relate to it. Like let's say the loop antenna, they can't understand how it works. So I tell them, well, you got to look at the loop antenna like it's a tuning fork, and it resonates at a certain frequency, just like a tuning fork does. And when the little coil induces the magnet, induces energy into this, and if the capacitor and the loop is resonant to that, then the whole thing starts to vibrate, just like a tuning fork does. So I try to relate it to something that people can relate to. So people that don't know anything right away start understanding it. Some people don't even know what radio frequency is. So I enjoy that. And through the years, I've managed to be able to explain to people things in a way that they can understand it without getting into all kinds of Smith charts and all this other stuff that just baffles everybody.
How successful has Panama ARC been in terms of recruiting new members? And how many hams do you think you've made from your encounters with people that are becoming interested in amateur radio and they need a mentor?
Well, I don't count them because I don't try to get credit for that. But to get back a little bit to what we're talking about, being able to talk to people, the public, the last winter field day that Panama City Amateur Radio Club had up in a state park in Florida, they had a sign and it said the Panama City Amateur Radio Club, public invited. I went in there with the intent of being the people, the one that dealt with the public. When I go up to these field days and stuff like that, I can sit down and talk and call for points. I don't like repetitious things. I'll be there to help people solve problems with their antennas, help them rig things up, get computers working right. And then when people come by, ask all that questions, I'm the one that likes dealing with it. So I have a van that's a motorhome. I had a 43-foot vertical hooked up to the back of my hitch. I had 3 or 4 different loop antennas, and I have 3 or 4 different portable radios that I have in glow boxes. I had them all set up on the picnic tables. And when the public came, they wanted to know what this was, what it is, how's it work. And I had the field day that I was involved with Panama City Amateur Radio Club. I think 20 different people that didn't even have licenses that want to get their license. So a lot of people show a lot of interested in everything. So I was the one there answering all the questions of people that weren't hams. I'm sure that I was instrumental in getting, helping Greg recruit guys, and that we've recruited several new guys since I've been a member there. I mean, at least 20 of them. I don't want to say that I'm the one that got the credit for doing it because it was a team effort. And I just want to say that I think I helped with the program there.
Should we be targeting kids to amateur radio? And if you think we should, how would we do that?
Well, the new generation, they'll like something. The most things that they like is being able, and you got to get across their heads, is that this thing is fun, and you can talk to somebody across the world once you get going. We've had field days up here with the Panama City Amateur Radio Club. Not the Panama City, the West Park Radio Ops. We did it in conjunction with when they had the Boy Scout. The Boy Scouts had field day. I set up a CW thing where we can transmit. It wasn't through RF; it was through wires, and maybe 100 feet apart. And I got the kids to start sending Morse code to each other. They just got a big kick out of that, and I was surprised. The girls seemed to be doing better than the boys. This one little girl, 7 years old, she started sending. I had a chart there, and she picked up on that, and she's sending things back and forth by looking at the chart. Little boys back and forth, and everybody just thought that was the greatest. Being able to do that excites a lot of kids, and just the fact that you could talk to somebody, anywhere in the world, that gets them excited. A lot of kids now, that's not good for everybody, because some of the kids, they're just hooked on a cell phone, and they think that with a cell phone they can go talk to anybody anytime they want. They don't understand that that's a very fragile system. And when I tell them that you can talk to anybody around the world without anything, just a battery, a wire, and a radio, and nobody's in between, then it starts getting into their heads, and they say, man, that if something happens, that's cool. So maybe explaining what it is, what really ham radio is. A lot of people just hear about it, but they don't even understand really what ham radio is.
What do you think the greatest challenge facing amateur radio is now?
The greatest challenge is to get a lot of people to understand that the internet and cell phones are fragile. That's just like that happened in Puerto Rico. That happened. My house in Florida. I have a house in Panama City. So Michaels went in there and just destroyed everything. and without internet for about maybe 2 weeks. They'll sell nothing. During that time, nobody could use credit cards. Nobody could use cell phones. If you want something done, you had to pay cash because you couldn't cash checks. If you get across that to people, how fragile things are and how important it is to be able to do what we do, I think they'll start looking more toward it. Until something like Michael's hit Panama City, where everything totally is gone. Even my own son, I always carry a certain amount of cash on me, and he's, oh no, I do everything with my credit card. I said that credit card is good as long as there's an internet or somewhere where a guy's got access to. Oh, well, that's everywhere. And he said, no, that's not. you might wind up. You're going to wind up at one point where nobody wants that plastic card, and you're going to need cash. And so that's kind of, you can relate that to this ham radio. It's the same thing as if you have a ham radio and everything goes to heck, it'd be like having cash.
Did your wife or children, did they ever have an interest in amateur radio or technical things like you?
My daughters, I had the company, and I look forward to like passing it on to them at one point. So I told the girls, you got to learn boy things. They were maybe 6, 7 years old. And they were, what do you mean, Dad, boy things? I said, you need to learn. You need to learn like what electricity is. You need to learn how a car works. You need to learn how to use a hammer. So when I got out of the Navy, I started buying. I bought a 2-family, fixed it up, and then I bought another fixer upper, and I move into them. My daughters were around it. They learned by being around, putting up studs, putting footers in, busting up concrete, and putting driveways in. They were observe all that. So they grew up seeing all of this stuff. And as they got older and stuff and got married, my oldest daughter, she designs and builds her own home. She just got through building one that she designed that was $500,000. And my younger daughter, she does a lot of things on hand, not necessarily radio, but they understand radio. Because of me being on radio, they got really heavy into computers, and they're way advanced in computers than most everybody else. And that's what helped them get jobs. My oldest daughter ended up being a manager of a home remodeling company, and she had 25 employees, and she ran the company for 9 years. Now she works for the Cleveland Clinic, and she runs a hospital. She's a facility manager. My other daughter, well, her hobby is getting old furniture and restoring it. And she makes a lot of money doing that.
Do you still have a machine shop in your house?
Yeah, I have a small little lathe. I used to have a big lathe and actually a Bridgeport mill, but the space it takes up and the amount of use I put to it didn't add up. One of the things being in business, you have to calculate whether what you have is worth having. So you have to be real quick about making decisions. So I sold the lathe, I sold the the milling machine. I have just a drill press that I could use if I need to mill something. And then I have a small lathe, little one, and it's just the one that I bought at Harbor Freight. And it's good for making knobs and making shafts and small things. Like if I want to make a plastic knob, I can make it on that. Or if I want to make like a 1/2-inch shaft to connect to a capacitor, I can do that. These loop antennas, when you have a capacitor, you got to stay a distance, otherwise it affects the tuning. So I make plastic shafts so I can control the capacitor from a distance of maybe 6 inches. So I make those on the lathe.
What excites you the most about what's happening in amateur radio now?
Well, everything, all aspects of it, all interests me. One of the things that's a challenge, which really has to go a long way before it becomes anything of much benefit, would be. But it is interesting, bouncing signals off of satellites. That's a fun thing to do. It makes you make a good enough antenna and understand, how it comes up and how it goes across. The other one, which I haven't got too much into it, is the digital aspect of it. Right now I have a TS890, which is a really nice radio that does everything. That RIDI and the digital modes, and those are things that there's just some new challenges that you can get into. Now you can even start sending. I have an ICOM 705. You can start sending like even videos through it. Not videos, but like pictures through it. So it's evolving and just keeping up with all this, the steps, the new challenges. That's kind of like what keeps me interested in it.
Now, you just mentioned that your current rig consists of a Kenwood TS890, and you now have an IC705. I'm assuming you take the 705 out into the field with the magnetic loops and the portable antennas?
Yeah, I had a great opportunity to live near Amateur Radio Supply here in Cleveland, over in Wickliffe. And I knew the original owner, the guy that started that way back when they had Collins equipment on Euclid. And I was just a kid. So through the years, I kept going with them and learning stuff. But what they did good there was that they would take trade-ins and they would go through them, and then they'd have them there, and you could buy them used. And if you didn't like it, within a month, you could bring it back and apply the money of that for another radio or a newer radio. So I took advantage of that. And every time there was a radio I was interested in, I'd go over there and buy it used and tinker with it, learn how to operate it and everything. And then if I liked it, I'd go back and buy it new, or then I would just sell it to somebody else and go buy another one. So I'm not a guy that keeps radios forever and ever and ever. I like learning. I like keeping up with the technologies. So when a radio comes along that's something new, I got to have it. I got to have the first one. I got to figure out how everything works on it. So I got the ones I have now. I got the 705 because it does a lot. And although it's a QRP radio, I like the screen and everything. But then right away, I make a container for it. One of the first things I do is make a go box. Put it in a go box. Figure out how to make a go box. And I don't mean a go box and a piece of plastic Tupperware. I mean a military quality go box with seals in it. So I sit down and design that and make them because I have a break. And so every radio that comes along, I figure out how to make it portable. And nothing like the TS890, but the smaller one. So I have the 7100 in a go box with a 20 amp hour battery in there. It's all and it's sealed. It's watertight. And I can carry it around with a strap anywhere real quick, set it anywhere. And I have a battery that will run it for many hours. I've even put the 7300, I put them in a go box. That's a big radio, but I built go boxes for that. And so every radio that seemed practical to be able to take portable, I get them and figure out how to put them in go boxes. And I have through the years. I've had a lot of them. In fact, some of them, and I don't take time to put too much on stuff on the internet, but I think is a PK mod.
Right, the German website, I think.
I've posted some stuff in there with some pictures of some of the go boxes.
Right, I think that's called DK mod.
Yeah, DK mod.
I've been on there for years.
Yeah, if you go there and you put in my call sign, there's some things I did. I did that so I can be able to get on there when I'm looking for something. So if you donate something, you become a free member.
Right. For people that are listening, DK Mod has like schematics of old radios. So if you've got an old radio and you need a schematic or a tuning procedure or something like that, it's a very nice kind of old encyclopedia. Maybe it has a lot of new stuff too. Frank, what advice would you give to new or returning hams to the hobby now?
Well, I would a lot of older hams, they're still used to the old radios and stuff. I have friends down in Florida that still have the real old radios and they think that that's the greatest. I said, don't be afraid to try something new. I have a friend, Gil, I think his call sign is Kilo Charlie 4 India Romeo India. And he's had the same radio for, 30 years since I've known him. And I say, hey, Gil, give yourself a treat. Get something modern, more new. Oh, well, I'm used to this. This is my baby. I said, no, go get yourself the 7300. He's, but that's, and I said, you know what? If I have to buy it for you and take it over there, try it. So finally he went and tried it. And he says, wow, Frank, I didn't know that things have gotten that better. I said, don't be afraid.
Yeah, an order of magnitude better, Frank, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I have the 7300 as well. It's a game changer in terms of if you're operating, older stuff, it's a game changer. I think that's great advice. I think don't be afraid to try something new. I think that's one of the great things about amateur radio is there's always something new, don't you think?
Well, yeah, that's the whole thing of it. I used to get the amateur radio handbooks way, and I'd always wait for they come out, the new publications, because I was always excited to see what else is new, and seeking out new stuff is what I've always wanted to do, and I still do that.
Frank, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. This is really fun. I appreciate the stories and the wisdom that comes from those stories. So with that, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the QSO Today podcast.
Okay, Eric, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure meeting you too. Like all the great people I meet on ham radio, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Well, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed it. That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Frank. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in KC8VKA in the search box at the top of the page. Be sure to click on the Expo menu item on the top of the page for updates on the upcoming QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo. I am updating it as I have more information. My thanks to ICOM America for its support of the QSO Today podcast. Please show your support of ICOM America by clicking on their banner in the show notes pages. You may notice that some of the episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor this or any other episode into written text, please contact me. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing the subscribe buttons on the show notes pages. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes pages, or use my Amazon link before shopping at Amazon. Amazon gives me a small commission on your purchases while at the same time protecting your privacy. I'm grateful for any way that you show appreciation and support. It makes a big difference as I head towards episode 400. QSO Today is now available in the iHeart Radio, Spotify, YouTube, and a bunch of other online audio services, including the iTunes Store. Look on the right side of the show notes pages for a listing of these services. You can use the Amazon Echo and say, "Alicia, play the QSO Today podcast from TuneIn." My thanks to Ben Bresky, who edits every single show and allows both this host and my guest to sound brilliant. Thanks, Ben. Until next time, this is Eric, 4Z1UG, 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.